This is a Guide Your Light network production, creating podcasts with purpose.
So we talk a lot in our household about privilege, the privilege that you are born into, because that's often the case, but the privilege that you then create with the opportunities that you have, and then kind of in context to areas of Cambodia where the privilege is different, the experiences are different, and how we were all, but especially my kids, are going to walk through those spaces. So yeah, it's things we do in general, but yeah, in that kind of environment, very important.
Hello, I'm Maritza Barone. Welcome to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. Has there ever been a moment in your life where you heard, read, or were told something that you simply could not unhear? Something that made you stop in your tracks and helped you to see the world differently in some way, a better way. On this podcast, we create those life-changing moments for you through interviews with some of the world's most profound people around the globe. We explore groundbreaking ideas in health and well-being.
What we're really doing is getting to the root cause of your symptoms. And often we find that that is an emotional block that we have been carrying around in our body that's become almost crystallized and created a physical symptom.
Relationships.
And for women as well, when I talk about respect, it's called respecting yourself, which is don't overgive. Women will tend to put themselves one down, and then wake up at 40 and go, wait a second, I am woman, I deserve respect.
Personal and professional transformation.
This is true of any skill. You only develop it by doing it. And so, if you don't get out there and just start doing it and being a bit rough around the edges at the beginning, you can't work on your craft. And so it can't turn into something.
Spirituality.
Because I think when we know who we really are, we think we're our name and our body and our form and our hair and our clothes and our skin and but when we know who we really are as infinite beings, we're free.
And so much more. So settle in. This might just be a big day for you, where you hear something that changes your life in the most transformative way. Hello, welcome back, my friends, to Things You Can't Unhear, where our aim and our mission is to change lives through the conversations that we have. On this episode today, I have Caroline Brunne joining us. She's a truly courageous and remarkable human being, standing up for survivors of sexual abuse with integrity and so much grace. Caroline and I have known each other for several years. We've worked together on different projects, and we also recently traveled to Cambodia together with a group of business leaders to work and teach the children at Sunrise Cambodia entrepreneurial skills, which was a completely life-changing trip. And I got to see Caroline in a whole new light. Not only is she an amazing business mind, but she has a story to share and some life experiences that changed her world, and she now helps other people navigate. Today, she shares her experiences with us as a survivor of sexual abuse in her home, and how she kept quiet for 3 decades so her family's world wouldn't crumble. But how on the inside, she was crumbling herself. Her bravery to come out of the shadows is a story that I think must be shared. So I'm doing my part to share it here on this platform. Take a listen to Caroline Brunne, and just a warning, this may trigger some listeners out there. So if you or someone you know needs support, get in contact with Lifeline, and I'll leave those details in the show notes. We'd love you to share this conversation with someone in your world who may need to hear it. Welcome, Caroline Brunne, to the Things You Can't Unhear podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, I'm so excited. This has been a long time coming. We've been talking about this for a while.
And that is all my fault. I do apologize. But we did spend recently 2 weeks together in Cambodia on this absolutely life-changing trip with Project Gen Z. And we became a lot closer. So I've known you for a lot of years, quite a few years. And it's been in passing, but we became quite close on this trip. And it was such a special experience the whole entire trip. And
Mm.
I've spoken about it a little bit on the podcast already, but the way that the group that we were in really shared and opened up towards each other on that trip was just beautiful. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. It's so powerful. And I think for me, it was actually really wonderful. You shared a moment with me at one point about kind of witnessing me with my kids. And that was really interesting because, you know, you and I have met in a through Project NZ. We spoke at an event right just before the pandemic hit back in 2020. And that's how we met. And yeah, but we've known each other in this business capacity, in a very different capacity. And so when you're in mum mode, and I'm not normally in mum mode when I go on the trips, because I've been to Cambodia twice before the recent trip, and I forget that people are witnessing me in a really different capacity. So I know that you got to witness me parenting my two, not children. My eldest is a young adult, but yeah, it was really special. And just watching, for me, the highlight was watching them integrate with all of these incredible entrepreneurs and friends of mine. I think that was definitely one of my highlights of the time over there.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, Caroline, because I actually want to bring it up on this chat too. And the trip was an amazing experience for us adults, but we were open to bringing our families along as well. And I brought my husband, Charlie, and you brought the whole family. So you brought your husband and your two kids. And the way that we saw some pretty testing things as well over there. There were highs, there were lows, and there were all different scenarios each day that we were going to be encountering. And you were not only a support for them, which is amazing, but you were also a support for me. You're like, Maritza, you're probably about to cry in the next 10 seconds.
Yeah, I was like, please have you
I'm feeling good.
tissues?
Why? Really? I'm feeling good. No. And then sure enough, I cried. But
yeah, I think now you know when Caroline says get some tissues, you know I'm not playing. Like it's for real.
But I saw you preparing. So each morning we'd go and have breakfast, with our families and as a group, and you'd prepare your kids for the day. So I could hear you on the other table next to me. And you're like, okay, kids, this is what I assume is going to be happening today.
Yeah.
This is how, these are the expectations that you might need to look at for yourselves. And I think it was such a beautiful thing. And that's why I pointed it out to you, is that a lot of the time we do things like this and it just you just think it's the norm, but it really is. I think it was a really beautiful thing to witness, to see how you're preparing your kids for this adventure that they're going on and equipping them for the highs and lows. And it's probably because of your journey that you're so able to do this, and because you're a coach as well.
Yeah, don't get me wrong, having experienced Cambodia a few times beforehand, there were those moments where even to people like yourself, I was like, hey, just tissues, like just be ready. But I am really open with my kids. So I guess for context for for the listeners, my youngest is about to turn 12 and my eldest is 19. So they're not little kids, but we talk really openly about the human experience and what it's like to walk through spaces, how everyone comes to a space in a really different way with different lived experience, especially when we are in different environments. We haven't done a ton of traveling as a family, but we've done a little bit. And so it's really important for me to not only prepare my children to be in a new space, but to prepare them for what might come up for them, and just to be open to that. So yes, all the normal stuff of like, don't forget your drink bottle and have you been to the toilet and like that mum stuff that you do. But in addition to that, kind of, hey, just know that if you need anything, even if we might not be together, because we split up at a few points in the trip, especially towards the end when we were working with the children at Sunrise, and we purposely made sure that my kids weren't going to be in our teams. So the two boys were together, but they were in a different team. And so I was like, make sure you bond with these particular adults. Look out for this person if you need something, whatever else. So yeah, I know the trip can be a lot. It can bring up a lot of questions, a lot of learning, a lot of emotional kind of ups and downs as you process the environment that you're in, and then put yourself into context of that. So we talk a lot in our household about privilege, the privilege that you are born into, because that's often the case, but the privilege that you then create with the opportunities that you have, and then kind of in context to areas of Cambodia where the privilege is different, the experiences are different, and how we were all, but especially my kids, are going to walk through those spaces. So yeah, it's things we do in general, but yeah, in that kind of environment, very important.
Well done for being an incredible mentor to your kids and to people that you're surrounded by. It's a privilege to be in your space and help share your mission, because it's so important. Now, you mentioned you have been to Cambodia several times, and this was your third time. It was a life-changing trip for you initially, wasn't it? One of the trips that you went on really helped you see your life experiences differently. And piece it together.
That's very true. And I shared that on this recent trip, which is always really interesting because, as I said, being on the trip a few times, there's been a big gap between this trip and the last one I went on in 2019. And I've shared little snippets of my story with people. So there's a few kind of, what would we call them? Like just the people that are always on the trips, the forever Project Gen Zers. And so a few people had heard elements of my story, but we had an opportunity to share this year after a reflection of kind of going to the killing fields, spending time with the children, a few other things that give us an opportunity to reflect. And I shared about the trip in 2018 for me. So what was interesting is going into that trip, I was very focused on proving myself as an entrepreneur. I had really a lot of imposter complex around, did I even deserve to be on the trip? Was I a good enough business owner? I was in awe of the people that I was traveling with, and there's some big personalities on those trips. So you kind of, if you've got any of that imposter stuff bubbling away, it can heighten that very quickly, even though everyone's super lovely and it's a really nurturing environment. What I wasn't expecting, I walked into that trip knowing we were going to go see the kids at Sunrise, and I prepared myself for that. And similar to how I tried to look after new people on this year's trip, I had people kind of going, hey, have you got some tissues? And all of that stuff. I had people that did that for me back in 2018. And I think I'd gone into that second part of the trip visiting Sunrise with a real mum hat on. Like I was thinking about kids and I was thinking about it from that perspective. And I guess for me, one of the things that is really significantly different about 2018 and now is that in 2018, I didn't publicly consider myself as a survivor of trauma. I knew that I was a survivor of trauma, but I had never really spoken about it publicly. Many of the people on the trip, even my closest friend who was traveling with me on that trip, didn't know of my story. And I don't even think I knew my story as well as I did after that trip. So walking into Sunrise that first morning that we traveled there and meeting the kids and being briefed about the things we would see and some of the trauma the kids had experienced, I was like, oh, okay, like it was very surface level. I was like looking at it from a really practical perspective. But the more I spent time with those children, the more that I realized that I was one of those children. I had experienced child sexual abuse and incest and family violence. And in addition to my lived experience, I had chosen to remain in my family setting because family was the most important thing for me. And so in spending time with these kids and speaking to some of the older children and having them often tell me that if they could, they'd go back home, they'd go back to their parents, or they'd go back to their family, even though in some cases that wasn't the safest place for them to be and they had safety at Sunrise. That realization and the parallel of that in my own story completely broke me, and I didn't know it was breaking. So I packed up, went home to Australia, kept trying to do life, and this kind of crumbling on the inside had begun. And it had probably begun in lots of different ways for lots of different reasons, But it was like, and I describe this in my memoir, and I write about Cambodia and that experience in my memoir, but it's like the foundation of a building, and there's a hairline crack, and then it cracks and it keeps cracking, and like this foundation was rupturing inside of me, and I just couldn't get through. Like, you know, I got into 2019 and I kept pushing through, and I tried to push through, and I went back to Sunrise again and had a similar experience. But I was like, no, I'm not. I know that I am one of those kids, but I'm not one of those kids. And then at the end of 2019, the whole foundation completely crumbled. And I obviously went on to do some really big things with my life from that point in early 2020. And I'm sure we can talk about that. But yeah, I'll forever be indebted to the kids at Sunrise for giving me a visual and emotional and spiritual understanding of my own lived experience, and in such a really simple way that it doesn't matter how much privilege you have, it doesn't matter where you are. Sometimes terrible things happen to good people, and we fight that battle, that instinctual need of wanting family whilst also navigating the complexities of trauma. That was a lot.
No, yeah, I just want to allow your words to land in the best possible way, because they're important. And, you know, I care about you because I know you, and words are words, but then words are also real. So thank you for sharing all of that. And, making that step after returning from Cambodia was a huge thing that you did to make some huge changes in your life when you knew life was never going to be the same after that. Would you like to share that next step with us of what rolled out after your return?
Yeah, so I didn't know a pandemic was coming, so maybe not the best timing on my part. So we went back to Cambodia in September of 2019, and though that isn't just, it isn't the only piece of the puzzle, it definitely forms an important part of the puzzle. But yeah, I got to the end of 2019, and that foundation that I was explaining before, that just current, it was just this unease, and I was like, oh, something's not right. And I got to kind of Christmas time of 2019, and I was like, something's got to change. And I essentially decided to write an email to my parents and my older brother to explain to them that I was no longer going to hold this secret anymore. Now, I need to go back a step to put that into context. So I was abused by my father, and the abuse happened when I was quite young, between the ages of 10 and 14. No one in my household, from my understanding, knew this was occurring. When the abuse stopped, it took me about 2 years to disclose to my mum, and the reality is that happened in a really explosive way. And then she managed that situation in what I believe was the only way she knew how. I have a lot of grace and love towards my mum, and though I don't necessarily think that I would make the same decisions and choose the same choices as her, I'm also really mindful of the complexities of family violence and coercive control and complicated relationships. And so when I was 16 and I disclosed to her, though she seeked out some mental health support for me, we didn't leave. My brother found out around the same time. He's older than me, and that caused some challenges in our relationship. But the consensus was pretty clear that nothing was changing in our family dynamic. And the key part of this as to why I probably didn't, well, there were a couple of reasons why I probably didn't think to do anything different. One, I was 16, and I have had a 16-year-old, and we'll have another one in a couple of years. And those 16-year-olds think they can do all this stuff. They don't have a lot of capacity. Like, they're still children in a lot of ways. And I have a younger sister who at the time was 8. So it became pretty clear to me that nothing was really going to change in our household. And I was looking at my sister, who was a few years away from the age I was when the abuse had started. And so I just started putting some mechanisms in place. And I don't think I ever remember consciously deciding any of that either. This was, you're in it, so you do it. Like, you don't you don't think you do. And even when I think about the time of the abuse itself and everything that kind of happened before and after, we have primal instincts of how we protect ourselves and what we do and trauma responses and that sort of stuff. So I'm 16 and I get a bit of pretty shitty mental health support and then just convince myself that I'm fine. I'm a pretty angry fine, but I'm angry and I'm kind of getting through. And then I switched that a few years later to just high achieving. So, I went through stages of dabbling with drugs and alcohol and just really poor behavior and a few other things, which were, from a timing perspective, that's what we expect teenagers to do. So no one really flinched at that. And then I kind of focused on my career and business and other things and just put one more thing on my plate and one more thing on my plate. And my form of numbing then became being a high functioning trauma survivor. I did that so well that I did that for 3 decades almost. So what that meant is that in 2018, 2019, when I'm talking about this foundation crumbling, is I was volunteering for UN Women and I was running campaigns and I was doing this charity work with Project Gen Z and fundraising for Sunrise, and I was doing all this amazing stuff and I was speaking about, women and children and how we need to look after them. And I felt like such a fraud because I was like, wait, I'm on the front line. I'm speaking up about this stuff. I'm working with some incredible organizations. I'm speaking on stages with women like you about empowering young women and whatever. And no one knows my story. And not that anyone needed to, in the sense that, that's the purpose of our truth. And, some people choose to disclose publicly and some people don't and whatever. Like it's not
hiding a huge part of yourself.
Yeah, I was like, wait, I'm showing up in this way and I'm like cheering out this really important message, but I feel like I'm just lying to everyone. And the person I actually, in many ways, knew that I was lying to was my sister. So we had created this life for her, and in my book I refer to it like the Truman Show, the movie The Truman Show. So for anyone who doesn't know the movie, brilliant movie. And essentially the Truman is a character. He's been a world has been created for him in a studio as such. Spoiler alert, if you are planning to watch it, I'm probably going to ruin it for you. And
a couple of decades to watch it. So
yeah, I know. It's like it's been out for a while. Yeah. So he's, as a baby, is brought into this TV studio. Everyone around him are actors and they create this whole world for him. And it's like he loves it and it's amazing and everyone's got their role to play. And then one day he just stuff just starts to not make sense. And he's like, wait, this isn't adding up. And eventually he realizes he's in this made up world and he decides to leave the Truman Show. And so when I share about my sister, she was Truman. We spent our whole lives creating a life for her. Now, not all of that stuff existed. We did all those things and we shared all those moments as a family, but the relationship she had with my father was one that could be described as normal as you can get. And I sat on the edge of that, holding my breath, just trying to make sure I was looking out for clues of if she was really okay and all of that sort of stuff. And when you've done that for so long and you've read off a script for so long, you don't really realize you've even done it for that long. And fast forward to my late 30s and I was like, oh, I'm so tired. So a combination of that and this kind of very external, high achieving person that I was, and the cracks were just forming on the inside. And so I got to the end of 2019, as I was sharing before, and I drafted an email. I didn't send it until early 2020. And I said to my parents and my brother that I was going to disclose to my sister. That caused some ripples. But the reason I reached out to them is because I wanted them to be aware of what was about to happen. And I also gave them the opportunity to be present for that conversation. I didn't want a he said, she said kind of situation. Once again, wanted to have as much grace in the situation as I could. I went to see my sister in February and the rest unraveled as time went on. The pandemic hit. That created some logistical challenges. We were all in different states. It was probably a blessing in disguise in some ways because it created space and distance that was forced, which meant that we just had to bunker down and everyone had to do their thing. And I guess fast forward to where we are now in 2024, my parents are still together and married. I am estranged from them and from my brother. My sister and I are very close, and we are still navigating what I class as the ocean of grief that we live in as we mourn people and relationships that still exist and people that are still alive. And we navigate, and I navigate, what it looks like to be a survivor of child sexual abuse, incest, and family violence, whilst choosing to actively speak and act and work in this space now to support others in similar situations.
Huge courage that it would take to even take those steps forward after being silent for 3 decades. Because obviously you hold back from these things because you know what the flow-on effect will be, and it's probably never the right time. It never felt like the right time. But like you said, and it happens to a lot of people who have gone through trauma, is the cracks just continue to unfold until breaking point or a massive realization hits, like it happened for you, and you just couldn't go on anymore being silent and not taking that courageous step to be true to yourself and no matter what it meant for everyone else, for once putting yourself first.
Yeah, very much so. And that was a really big part of it. The timing is an interesting thing that you've raised, because it was like every year it was like maybe, but I was like, oh, but it's someone's 21st or it's someone's this or my children or this and that. Like there was never a good time. Like there was never going to be a good time. And in many ways, that window of when I disclosed when I was 16 was one of those windows where everything was breaking. So everything else could have broken. But my sister was so young, and I didn't even actually think to share with her at the time. I don't remember even crossing my mind. But yeah, there is never a good time. And sometimes just the flow of things is just the way they're supposed to flow. I remember having a conversation in the very short period of time between sharing with my parents and my brother and then actually speaking to my sister, like telling them that I was going to speak with her. And there was a significant family event coming up that was meant to happen in 2020. And I was having a conversation with a family member and they were like, can't you just wait till after? And I was like, well, I can, but it just means that I won't attend that thing because I'm not pretending anymore. So like I'm not opening this door kind of part way. And I explained to them that like, I had felt that I had been walking along, the five of us had been walking along this road together, and I could see the landmines. And so I would just run ahead, swallow them, brace for impact, keep it together, and then look around and go, okay, my family's intact. Let's keep going. And I'd just been doing that over and over and over again. And I said, but the cracks are forming on the inside. And if I have to keep doing this, one of two things is going to happen. I'm going to implode, and it's going to be this really sad story of Caroline was so successful and her business was so successful and she was such a great mum, and then she just had this weird mental breakdown and ended up in an institution because she just lost it, and everyone be scratching their heads trying to work out what happened to Caroline. Or I'm going to explode and there's going to be no grace and there's going to be no consideration for anyone because it's going to be full of fire and rage. And I'm not going to have control of that. So everyone is going to get burnt in the process. So that's what I'm feeling right now, because I have no more capacity to jump over these landmines and save you all time and time and time again. So I said, I need this to be distributed. Because one, I was never supposed to be the person taking any of this. And I somehow became the scapegoat. But in addition to that, like, they're not mine anymore. So I actually just need to get off this path. Like, it's not my space anymore. But in doing that, and even sharing this analogy before I shared with my sister, in the months to come, and probably definitely that year, there were so many times I watched them hit those landmines. And I went by instinct to go, oh, but and I'm like, not my job anymore. And that was heartbreaking because I had spent nearly 30 years protecting everyone from this hurt. And I was like, I can't, the genie is out of the box. I can't do it anymore. I can't even put it back in if I tried. So that in itself was a huge unlearning of being the person that takes the brunt every time, and then not being able to do that for my family, not being able to sacrifice for them in a way that I had done in out of love for so long. That in itself is incredibly hard, and it's so much unlearning that we do as survivors, especially when we're silenced, that we have to train ourselves to put ourselves first again.
Which hasn't been done before. So like you said, a great unlearning. I'm so glad you and your sister are close and she's supporting you through all of this and being by your side. Have you got extended family that has been by your side as well? How have they navigated this information?
Ooh, this is a really tricky one because I have a massive extended family.
Do you?
I do. So my parents are both one of 8, and I have 28 first cousins. So
28 first cousins. Put me to shame. I thought I was 37.
Exactly. Most people are like, I've got a lot of cousins. I'm like, do you? Do you really?
Are they in Australia?
All but 2. So
Right.
That's a lot. It's a lot of family members. Change is hard, and facing difficult conversations is hard. And The Truman Show was a really good show. So I think a lot of people are just happy to keep watching that show. Big families normally mean that like the rumour mill or the gossip train or the whatever, like that's how big families work. You know, this isn't a topic that people haven't heard of. I'm very aware that there have been discussions. But to come forward and I guess publicly support me requires a level of strength and acknowledgement that I understand it's really hard. And if you'd asked me that question a couple of years ago, I probably would have given you an angrier answer because I was pretty disappointed. But I think I've just gained further understanding of just how much you have to face, especially as a family member. So you then kind of go, well, what did I see or what didn't I see, or where was I and why didn't I help my niece or my cousin or my whoever I am to them? And what do I do now? Do I not speak to that person? Do I confront that person? Like there's so many questions that come up for each individual. So in general, not a lot has been said. That was tricky before I published my memoir. I wasn't expecting a love bomb. I was expecting a riot. Like I wasn't expecting people to be happy. I didn't get either, to be honest. Like I had a very small, when you're talking about that many numbers, I had very small amount of people reach out, and they have been really wonderful in support. But support behind the scenes. And once again, if I go back to what I was saying before, I understand why that's behind the scenes. And in the end, I don't need some big public display of support. I just need to know that my people are my people. So I've got a few people that have definitely reached out and have been wonderful. And also have helped, like me sharing in the way that I have, it's helped them educate themselves on what grooming looks like, what coercive control looks like, and how it can happen in families, and how they can do better when it comes to educating themselves and supporting survivors and all of that. So I'm really glad that that's been a gift as well to them in a way. But yeah, it's the same with friends actually. There's been people that I really was expecting to reach out and check in on me and whatever, and it was just silent. But the more I understand this topic, the more that I understand how hard it is. I actively use the word incest, but that's probably only been in the last 18 months to 2 years. The first few years, like I would use it in very small settings because I know how uncomfortable it makes people. Kind of, you feel it from the inside, but it's those kind of conversations that I'm having to try and help people understand how common it is in many ways.
taking a quick minute to interrupt this conversation to let you know about something exciting I am growing. As you might know, I'm incredibly passionate about helping people to find and share their voice, especially if their voice is one that aims to create positive change in others. And I've launched a podcast network with purpose. It's called the Guide Your Light Network, that features podcasts and voices that inspire, educate, and transform listeners. And we have a library of podcasts that are part of our network that truly embody that mission, and we're looking for more. If this has sparked interest in you and you are ready to start exploring speaking and using your voice in this way, I'd love for you to check it out. Also, if you have something important to say and you don't know where to start to bring that to life, we can also help you to craft your authentic message through our Guide Your Light online sessions to help you get super clear on your intention, messaging, and structure needed to launch a podcast of your own that is authentically you. Just head over to guideyourlightnetwork.com. You did it like you said. You approached this in such a graceful way, and you had the conversation independently, and you really set up an opportunity for everyone to have the best experience out of a difficult situation. Did you get mentored to be able to do it in this way? Was there support that you reached out for, or was this just within you and it was your natural way of wanting to make these changes in your life?
At the time, I was working with Kemi Nekvapil as my life coach. So for anyone who knows of Kemi's work, she's brilliant. So I recommend that you. Well. Yeah. Okay. Amazing. You know Kemi, she's amazing. So Kemi was my coach at the time, and I coached with her for a few years after that point. So we started coaching. I'd done a group session, a group program with her in 2019, and then in late 2019 did some one-on-one sessions, and then she went on to be my one-on-one coach for 3 years. So she was there through the majority of the really big changes. But anyone who's worked with a life coach knows that they don't do the doing for you. They ask a lot of good questions, but the power sits with you. I think at the time when I was considering, or even consciously saying, everyone can be there and I'm happy for everyone to be witness to this conversation and so on and so forth, it probably initially came out of fear. A really big part of why I had taken so long, especially as an adult, to tell my sister is I was worried I was going to lose her. Or, which has happened, I was worried I was going to completely ruin her life. And I don't know if I've completely ruined her life, but I've definitely shattered it. This truth has shattered it. But I think initially the way that I made decisions was really like a risk assessment. I was looking at it from, how do I do this and cover my ass? Because I don't need someone questioning my truth. And so if I'm in a situation where there's more than one person, because I think that's the other thing, like when we talk about abuse like this, there's no witnesses. Like it is a he said, she said situation. So I didn't want to create that situation again. So I put the opportunity out there, and it wasn't taken up. Like I had that conversation with my sister one-on-one. But she was aware that they had been made aware and that they had been given the opportunity to be in the room. So, yeah, it was probably more a risk assessment than anything else. But in saying that, there's always been grace there because there's always been love there. So I think that's the bit that, especially when people hear about incest survivors and abuse that happens in family, it can be really hard for people who haven't had an experience like that to get their heads around this concept of love. But in my case, like I grew up in this life, in this family, and I often share about the fact that the way that I speak and my tone and my interest in music and art and culture and food, and there's so many things that I gained from growing up in that house with those parents, with those siblings. And because of all of that, I love them. And I didn't want to come from a place of creating more pain. This was something I needed to do so I could diffuse the pain that I was feeling on the inside. And I was also really mindful that if we didn't start speaking about this, we couldn't move and heal and change. Now, we all have different versions of moving and healing and changing, and that's why I'm now estranged from half of my family, because we have different ways of different things that we need and different ways of moving forward. But what's funny is, even now thinking about your question about was I ever mentored, or how was I ever taught to do this sort of stuff? Funnily enough, I probably learnt these skills from my parents, because they always taught me to speak up for what was wrong and to, look out for people and to do things with grace and to be the best version of yourself. And it's ironic that this is where it's landed, but those values came from the family I grew up in.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever consider bringing in the legal system?
Many times, for many reasons. It's so complicated. One, because I don't have a lot of faith in the legal system. Even when I think about the case that has happened just this week, it was a defamation case, not a rape trial. But when we look at Brittany Higgins, who was the most prominent case of sexual violence most recently in our history here in Australia, her rapist is now known as a rapist and isn't going to jail. And that was a one moment in time, that was one day. I know how the system works and the hoops you jump through and the way that the system interrogates survivors, because they are the complainant. That's how they're seen in a case. Just doesn't appeal to me, for so many reasons. One, because it just wouldn't, the likelihood of it ending up in any form of justice, if that's the word we're using, that wouldn't be it. The stress and trauma and likely detail that I would need to share publicly, that's not going to help anything. And then, as I said, I don't want to put any of us through that. So that's been the main reason why I haven't gone down that path. In moments where I have wanted to, it's just been out of anger. And that anger of wanting people to change or do something different. So there's a lot of things that I wish that my father would do. And it's more in the vein of healing and mental health and a range of other things that he's chosen not to do. So one of the things that I have found, that when I think about the criminal justice system and times when I have really wanted to pursue that, it has been more because I've wanted certain actions from my father. So there's certain programs and mental health support and other things I would really encourage him to do, because I come from this perspective that perpetrators are perpetrators because of something. And so there's a root cause to the behavior of violence against women in whatever context. And the only way that as a society we're going to make a change in this space is if we start looking at what is causing this problem and causing the symptoms, which is this behavior that then goes on to create trauma. So I've definitely had moments where I've really wanted to seek out the legal system to force certain things, but I also know that's not how it works. I don't have control of the outcome. There is a process called transformative justice or restorative justice. It's got a few different names. It isn't well known in Australia, and I believe there's only been 1 or 2 cases in the US where essentially it's almost like a mediation style where the perpetrator and the victim survivor go through a range of sessions together, and there are expectations of action from the perpetrator. That's really rare, and it's a really interesting process, and would probably be the only form of criminal kind of legal route that I would go down. As I said, mainly because I don't have a lot of faith in the criminal justice system, and justice is I think it's a complicated word. I understand that people have really formed opinions on this, and it's that whole, someone does something wrong, we punish them or we put them in jail. And I'm like, but what happens to them when they go to jail? And how long do they go to jail for? And what happens when they're in there? And what happens when they come back out? Are they any better? Probably not. So the other part of it is I'm mindful that my father is nearly 70. The likelihood of a 70-year-old man going to jail is pretty unlikely. And then if he was to ever survive in there anyway, yeah, it's very complicated. So hence why that is not the route I've taken.
So there's obviously, you've gone into advocacy work, and your aim now is to help other people who might have endured similar situations and trauma such as you. And I think that's really special, to be really honest. It's huge to think that you have to re-experience talking about this when it's something that you probably don't want to do a lot of the time or don't feel like doing sometimes. But the fact that you're doing it for others, for the greater good, is just so inspiring to see that journey. I'd like to know how you help others and how we can perhaps identify in others should they be going through trauma. Are there some common traits out there that you see from survivors who may be holding back from sharing their story or coming forward or being brave enough to be able to make this huge change within their life? And I shouldn't say brave, because even if they don't share, there's still so much courage that goes into everything, every element of their life. But that courage to step forward is definitely a massive thing.
There aren't necessarily any particular traits. And that's simply because as trauma survivors, we all do different things to survive and have different mechanisms. We know that trauma survivors are more likely to have problems with substance abuse and addiction, and then potentially, to flip that on its head, to be high-functioning trauma survivors and to be very busy to the point of burnout. Trauma survivors, we carry trauma in our bodies, so we are more likely to have illness and autoimmune diseases. But I often say to people when they're like, oh, I don't know anyone that's been through anything like that, and I'm like, the statistics tell us that you do. Like, the reality is, like, be it if we're talking about child sexual abuse or we're talking about domestic violence or we're talking about whatever, someone in like if you named 5 people or 10 people that you know and created a space where they could share openly, you're going to hear some stuff. So with that in mind, with the fact that these people are right under your noses and they are your people, I would say the most important thing to do is to speak openly in spaces where you're with people that you know about the fact that you support survivors. And that may be that you read about something that's happened or whatever, and you bring it up in conversation and you say, if that was my friend, I would want them to know, or whatever else. Outright asking a survivor is not a good idea. So unless you feel that they're in an environment where they're not safe, and it's more from a space of trying to give them an avenue to remove themselves from an unsafe environment. But if this is a case of you think something may have happened to them in the past and you want to creating a space of safety and reminding them that these are your thoughts on how you would support, may be a good way to just create the space. They will come to you and share in their own time, because disclosing is incredibly hard to do, and creates, it takes a level of vulnerability that is difficult and does take courage and bravery. So yeah, I think they would be the things that I would be really mindful of, to be looking out for how you communicate, what you share, how you show support to the greater survivor community, so the people that are closest to you know that you are also a support to them. I am a creature of routine. Anyone who knows my story or my career story, I'm very organised. I've run organising companies before. It is just my jam. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm really mindful now in unpacking my life that is a trauma response that came from trauma. Like, I need to be in control, so that's how I create control. But routine has been the most important thing for me. So I make a point to ensure that I move my body. I get a lot of sleep. I have a lot of downtime. I focus on the things that I know that are most important to me. And I have a really tight, trusted group of people that I can speak to and call on when I need to. And that's really it. Like, there's nothing magical there. Like, there's some magic that happens in those things, like all the beautiful things that happen in your body when you move it and you exercise and you do that stuff, all the beautiful things that happen when you sleep well. Breath work is a new part of my process now, journaling, but it's all really simple stuff from my perspective. And the reason it's like that is because I need to be able to do it no matter what. I need to not have, if I had tools and things that I relied on, that could be detrimental if I didn't have those and I really needed them. So most of the things I can do no matter where I am or what's happening for me. I think trust is the hardest one for me, trusting people and really letting them in, and also just navigating relationships. I love people and I love my people, but I know that they have to put up with a lot because it can be really hard for me to really let people in. There's a lot of armor there still, and that's hard for the people that I love. Even my husband and my children who you've seen me with, they're really mindful that my story is complicated in those days where they're like, just need to give mum some space because it's not a good day, and they're pretty good with that.
Oh, Caroline, thank you for sharing all of that with us. It truly is inspiring to see the advocacy work that you continue to do and speaking up in this way. Can you tell me, I ask every guest this question on the podcast, is there something that you once heard that you couldn't unhear, that really stopped you in your tracks?
Oh, one, that's so hard. There's so many. I've got quotes up on my wall and everything. In context to today's conversation, I would say the thing that I can never unhear is to speak even when your voice shakes and to share your truth. That is by far the most powerful, and that can be in conversation with just one person. It can be something broader than that, but I think back to the conversation with my sister, the conversation with my mum, even conversations with people like you who, you know, I've disclosed to at different points in time, and my voice still shakes, but it's my truth and it's really powerful. So your truth is really important, and so make sure that you're speaking it.
Thanks for listening to the show. What did you think? And what did you feel? Let us know by leaving me a message on the Things You Can't Unhear Instagram community page. And if you can, give us some ratings love on your favourite listening platform.